Prologue. It was called the most secret place on earth, but there was nothing discreet about the way it lived. Nestled high in the jagged folds of the northern Annamite mountains of Laos, where emerald slopes rise like tidal waves of moss and ferns, and the clouds never cease their gentle caress, there lay a city uncharted on any map. They whispered its name in half-breaths. Long Tieng, a name that curled through the war-scarred hush of Southeast Asia like incense smoke over a ruined temple, scarcely believed, barely spoken, yet as real and as urgent as the thunder of distant bombs to those who stumbled upon its hidden runway, and yet undeniably real to those who had the fortune or the misfortune of finding themselves there. There are cities built from dreams, glittering with promises, and cities born from necessity, breathing with purpose. Long Tieng was neither. It was a city born of urgency, sprung into being like a whispered conspiracy, traced into the valley's red soil with the ink of high ambition and the ash of war. It was never meant to exist. No treaty bore its name. No atlas recorded its dusty lanes. And yet, hidden in a narrow valley some 3,000 feet above sea level, it pulsed like a secret between jungle and sky, half myth and half machinery. The city clung to the mountains like a whispered confession, suspended between sky and earth, between the seen and the silenced. From above, it appeared as a muted blur of rust-stained roofs and splashes of canvas, barely distinguishable from the jungle's endless canopy. But on the ground, it roared with a feverish rhythm, the orchestra of propellers and generators, of gravel crunching beneath heavy boots, of radios crackling in sharp bursts of code. It was a city built of sandbags and secrets, shaped by ambitions of greatness and the stubborn hope for democracy. From afar, it was only a smear of color against the wildness, but up close, Long Tieng crackled with tension, restless, raw, vibrating with things left unsaid. The airstrip came first, a ribbon of churned red earth cleaved into the valley's spine, wide enough to cradle fighter bombers and narrow enough to dissolve into low clouds. It split the land like a scar. Pilots in oil-stained flight suits coaxed Sky Raiders and T-28 down its length at dawn and dusk. Their engines snarled like caged beasts. They turned sharply, shaking the ground with the weight of what they carried: fuel, munitions, mail, morphine, sometimes even hope. Land, unload, refuel, reload, depart. War here followed an unforgiving rhythm. The landscape was both sanctuary and snare. All around, mountains loomed like ancient sentinels, shrouded in mist, watching the unfolding madness with cold indifference. To the west, ragged summits bled into the horizon. To the east, ridges fell steeply into an unbroken sea of jade. No roads penetrated these walls of green, only wings and the wide open sky. This was the end of the line, the final outpost before the wilderness reclaimed it all. And yet, for all its militarism and mission, Long Tieng was startlingly human with a strange charm. It was a strange mosaic of makeshift wood shacks beside squat barracks. Parachute silk stretched overhead in quivering alcoves to block the Sunday. The air smelled of hearth smoke and aviation fuel. War plans scribbled beside bowls of noodle soup. Thousands of Hmong families had been relocated here, some willing and most not. They built their lives at the valley's edge, where children ran barefoot through the dust, and women boiled water in soot-blackened kettles under skies heavy with jet fumes. Their lives unfolded beside the Americans, though never quite with them. The Americans arrived with mirrored sunglasses and clipped vowels, speaking in acronyms and classified truths. They lived in compounds just close enough to be seen, just far enough to remain untouched. They lounged on sandbagged patios, sipping bourbon imported from abroad. They were CIA operatives, Air America pilots, Special Forces men. They wore their detachment like a uniform, each one carrying the weight of too many secrets, each one unable to shake the dust from his boots or the ache from his chest. By morning, the valley stirred with the familiar rustle of routine. Hmong women swept their thresholds with straw brooms, some barely past girlhood, others with faces etched by hardships. The first hum of propellers buzzed overhead as toddlers chased each other through the red earth, their laughter rising like birdsong across the valleys. The scent of freshly steamed rice mingled with sweat and diesel. The dirt runway buzzed with urgency as planes lifted into the sky swollen with monsoon clouds. The soldiers, mostly boys, though aged by the war, stood in lines with hollow gazes and uniform caked in dust. The jungle, lush and complicit, watched in silence. A rhythm emerged, fragile and improvised, half sweet, half sad. When the sun slipped behind the ridge and dusk gathered along the valley floor, it was the darkness that gave Longtieng its soul. Under moonlight, the city shimmered with a quiet and improbable beauty. Lights glowed above makeshift bars fashioned from salvaged wood and corrugated tin. Inside, soldiers and spies drank under dim bulbs to the soft murmur of jazz records brought in by pilots between missions. Cigarette smoke spiraled like ghosts into the warm air. The women moved through these nights like memory. Some wore silk sins and painted lips. Others carried only silence and a hardened gaze. They poured rice wine for strangers who had long forgotten their names. They laughed softly, as if rehearsed, and vanished before the music ended. Lanterns swayed like fireflies. Louis Armstrong's trumpet wept through a broken radio. Edith Piaf's voice cracked above the whir of fans. A lone Lao lullaby drifted from near the market, rising and falling like breath. At night, far from the thrum of engines and clatter of boots, the homes unfolded gently into their own rhythm. Beneath candlelight and the warm hush of oil lamps, women gathered in doorways, their fingers moving deftly as they embroidered delicate patterns onto fabric. The soft rustle of cloth and murmur of conversation filled the night with a sense of calm industry, as if by sewing what they could, they were mending something larger than themselves. Nearby, others rinsed vegetables in tin basins for the evening meal, while some sorted bundles of herbs for the morning market. The scent of garlic and ginger lingered in the air, mingling with smoke and steam. By the creek, where moonlight slipped like silk across the water, a few bathed in silence, their silhouettes drifting through the mist like living ink. And in quiet corners, stories were passed from one voice to another, spoken in tones reserved for memory. The night held them all, as if in its stillness it understood what the daylight could not, that even here, amid the machinery of war, there was beauty in the smallest rituals of staying alive. But nothing in Longtieng was ever said or done plainly. Every glance, every cigarette, every kiss behind curtain walls carried the weight of something unfinished. Somewhere between the tension of surviving and the fear of dying, people made meaning where they could. Briefly, selfishly, beautifully. There were poker games that lasted longer than the moonlight and affairs that disappeared at dawn. Letters were written by lantern glow, then burned before sunrise. Weddings happened quickly and quietly beneath ancient trees, while funerals passed with even less ceremony. The jungle never asked questions. It only reclaimed what was once its own. For all its noise, Longtieng carried a silence beneath it. It was a silence made of unsaid things, pressed into the bones of those who passed through. A silence born of absence and aftermath, of boys who never returned, of eyes that had witnessed more death than birth. It was a city balanced delicately between what was hoped for and what would never be, of unfinished sentences and farewells that came too soon. No one there knew how long everything would last, whether Longtieng would become myth or memory. The Americans spoke of freedom, the Hmongs prayed for peace, and the mountains, evergreen and eternal, seemed to lean a little closer each evening, waiting for the final plane to rise and vanish into the sky. Still, even in that place of impermanence, people lived. They planted gardens. They kissed with desperate tenderness. They stitched together scraps of normalcy they could. In a world unraveling by the hour, Longtieng was destined to not last forever. It was a mirage suspended between sky and soil, a way station for the lost, a graveyard of illusions, a city where men disappeared, where wars were fought in silence, a place to breathe one final breath before history swallowed them whole. But some places, once etched into memory, will never be forgotten, even long after they disappear and their former glory has slipped beyond time. Chapter 1. Laos, 1966. Long Tieng was most alive in the afternoons, when the sun hung low like a drowsy lantern, casting molten gold across tin rooftops and wooden shutters. Dust rose like incense, under the shuffle of rubber sandals and the swift press of military boots, mingling with the umami scent of dried carp, ripened mangoes, and roasted peanuts. The young man stood just outside the clinic, the front of his faded indigo-dyed hemp shirt stirring faintly in the breeze. He had come down from the hills with an elderly aunt, her cough now sharp and unrelenting, worsened by the monsoon rains. He had been reluctant to make the journey down into the city. Every day spent away from the fields was a day lost, soil left untouched, stalks ripening too long beneath the sun, time slipping through his fingers like loosened grain. The harvest waited for no one, and the new year loomed close. But the aunt who had raised him when his own mother passed had asked, and no other man in the village had stepped forward. To refuse would have been practical, but to refuse her felt impossible. And so, torn between the demands of the land and the unspoken debt to those who once cared for him, he agreed, shouldering the burden not just of the journey, but of everything that remained unsaid between those who give care and those who carry it. The aunt was inside, being tended to by the nurse with gentle eyes and firm, practical hands. He had promised himself he would not wander far. He could count on one hand the number of times he had visited the city, and each time it left him quietly awed. A part of him believed that if fate had been kinder, he might have been one of the many meanderings through the market with purpose, living in a house made of wood and cement with windows that opened to more than just sky and dust. Perhaps he could have enjoyed the sanguine life of peddling fruit to the locals, or even selling coffees and teas to the Americans, bananas polished to a shine, mangoes stacked in neat pyramids, laughter exchanged as easily as coins. But instead, he belonged to the hills, to a house of bamboo slats and thatched roofs, where the wind crept in without asking, and water had to be carried by hand. His hands had never known the ease of that imagined life, only the weight of seasons, silence of fields, and ache of hunger that ambition alone could not fill. Still, the chatter of the bustling market called to him, not with words, but in color, in clamor, in the language of movement and the breathless pulse of life. And so, he drifted, just a few paces from the door. The streets of Long Tieng unfolded around him in a kaleidoscope of scent, sound, and Sunday. Market stalls pressed shoulder to shoulder, tin buckets brimming with tamarind and clay jars of fermented anchovies, rows of fresh mustard greens vibrantly spread across wooden tables. The perfume of spice, sweat, and sweet overripe fruit thickened the air. Shopkeepers called out beneath sun-bleached awnings, their voices lilting above the clatter of enamel bowls and the pounding of the pestles beating shredded papaya in heavy mortars. Soldiers bartered for cigarettes, while women lingered over bolts of handcrafted silk, their laughter curling into the steam of noodle broth and charcoal grills. Children darted between crates of lychees and baskets of eggs, their sandals slapping stone as they shrieked with delight. There was rhythm in everything, the shuffle of sandals, the hum of haggling, the creak of ox carts inching past. Long Tieng pulsed like a heart at the height of its beat. A woman fanned charcoal flames with a woven palm leaf, smoke rising in lazy spirals and mingling with the scent of grilled pork and syrup-glazed plantains. A man squatted beside a radio, adjusting the dial as American rock flickered through static, waving itself into the dust and heat like it belonged. Old men played cards beneath patched umbrellas. Teenager boys leaned against bicycles, all teeth and charm, casting glances at girls who passed with baskets balanced effortlessly on their hips. It was a place of exchanges both spoken and silent, of things brought, bargained, and secretly longed for. And it was here, in the vivid tide of chaos, sound, and sun, that he stood. And somewhere within that golden sea of motion, he saw her. She moved through the crowd like a silk ribbon adrift in the breeze, laughter cutting through the murmur of voices like a sudden bird song at dawn. Her arm was looped through a friend's, her figure graceful and sure. The rose-colored sing she wore shimmered with every step, its hem embroidered with delicate plum blossoms that seemed to stir beneath the light. The sun, as if charmed, followed her, catching in her hair, lingering on her cheekbones, dancing at the fine curve of her jaw, and settling finally in the laughter, crinkling at the corners of her eyes. He watched her without blinking. Everything around her faded. She wove through the crowd with effortless grace, her presence unannounced but impossible to ignore. She glided through the market with such regal poise, as if the ground that she walked upon worship her entire existence and made the ordinary seem enchanted. Her hair, thick and glossy, was knotted loosely at the crown of her head, with wisps left to flutter across her cheeks as if the breeze had been entrusted with softening her edges. Her skin had the luminous warmth of ripe fruit at its peak, unmarred by sun or labor. Her mouth, full and softly parted, released laughter that was effortless, untouched by sorrow. And her eyes, slightly upturned, framed by lashes too long to be real, held a lightness that spoke of a life that had never been asked to kneel. There were 3 of them, girls on the edge of womanhood, radiant with that singular brilliance youth grants before the world presses its weight upon the shoulders. But he only saw her. She did not see him. Of course not. She had no reason to glance toward the dim corridor of the clinic, no reason to notice a boy from the hills with dirt still etched beneath his nails, whose shoulders bore the gentle bend of those who had learned to carry more than their share. He was invisible, the way shadows are invisible in light. Still, he stood motionless, breath paused in his chest, afraid that even the subtlest movement might dissolve the vision before him. And at that moment, without reason or without permission, he wished that she might be his, that perhaps, in some other life, she would stand beside him in the fields, barefoot, her laughter rising above the wind as it tangled through her hair, that she would reach for his hand with familiarity, not distance, that the girl dressed in silk would choose the soil and the sweat, that she would choose him. But a girl like her was never meant for a life like his. He had nothing to offer, no name spoken with any weight or worth, no inheritance to proudly boast, only calloused hands worn by labor and land that asked for everything year after year. His world was built of silence and routine, the kind of hardship that left no room for softness. A girl like her, raised in comfort he would never dare dream of, and books he had never touched, would unravel in it. Her porcelain skin would darken beneath the same sun that had already turned him to leather. Her fragile hands would blister, her cheerful laughter would fade. The young man continued to watch as the girl and her friends drifted through the market, their laughter scattering like petals in the breeze. With each step that brought her nearer, he felt the quiet, breathless stir of something unnamed in his chest, a trembling rhythm that rose and rose until it seemed even the air around could feel it. She passed within 4 feet of him, close enough that he could see the fine stitching along the sleeve of her blouse, close enough to smell the faint perfume of jasmine and tangerines. But she did not turn. She did not glance in his direction. She moved past him as if he were nothing more than part of the dust and shadow, an invisible boy in a world that never been hers to notice. He knew nothing about her, not her name, where she lived, what her voice sounded like when not laughing, or what secret thought made her eyes glint just so. Yet, it felt as though he had been waiting his whole life just to see her walk by. But he knew, somehow, with the foolish certainty of a boy who had never known gentleness, that he liked her, not only for her beauty, not only for the way her dress moved or the sound of her laughter, but for the way she carried joy so lightly, as if it had never once been taken from her, and her spirit so clearly belonged to nowhere and no one. For the way she looked, as if she had never had to trade her dreams for survival, he knew he liked her in the way that hurts a little, the way one might like the stars, close enough to see, too far to touch. "You're wasting your gaze," a voice beside him said. He blinked, startled from his reverie. The spell broke. It was the clerk from the clinic, a wiry man with mischievous eyes and a toothpick balanced lazily between his teeth. His grin was half knowing, half amused. The young man turned back toward the girls, who were already turning the corner past the noodle vendor, their laughter fading into the din of the market haggles and the bleating of tethered goats. "Who is she?" he asked, barely louder than a breath. The clerk chuckled. "A forbidden flower. Pa Ying, that's her name. Daughter of Nao Chia Tong. Her family owns the biggest trading shop in Long Tieng. They deal in everything: salt, textile, kerosene, even sell to the Americans." He leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. "Best to not decorate your dreams. Every boy with 2 eyes and a beating heart notices her, and every mother warns her son not to be foolish. She belongs among the sky, not among the dirt of our kind. One uncle is a lieutenant. The other runs the district." He paused. "Rumor has it that her bride price is 12 bars of silver." The young man said nothing. "She's not just beautiful," the clerk continued, scratching his neck. "She's clever, keeps the accounts for her father, reads Lao and French. Polite, yes, but sharp where it counts. And she knows where she belongs. Where she belongs, and where he did not." The young man looked down at his worn sandals, the rubber material cracked and caked with earth. His hands, curled unconsciously at his sides, were rough, dark with the memory of labor. He thought of his sister back home, of their small wooden house clinging to the side of the hill, of the way the hills swallowed the sun at dusk, of the long climb ascending to his home, and of the patch of land that demanded his attention every season and gave him just enough to keep returning. He had not come to find longing. He had come for medicine. The clerk gave him a pat on the back, perhaps more pity than warmth. "She's not for the likes of us. But no need to feel bad. Even the boys from Vientiane and Luang Prabon lose their footing when she walks by." But the young man was no longer listening. He only watched the space where she had disappeared. They moved through the market like drifting blossoms, 3 girls threaded together by youth and the unspoken tenderness of friendship. They wove between awnings and woven baskets with the ease of those who had wandered these streets since childhood. Pa Ying walked between them, not ahead and never behind, her steps measured. Her rose-colored sing shimmered with threads of silver each time the light touched its hem. She walked as she always did, with a grace so quiet that it did not announce itself but lingered in the memory of those who watched her pass. She did not speak unless prompted to. She did not need to. In a place where girls were still taught to take up as little space as possible, Pa Ying possessed a silence so self-assured it was often mistaken for mystery. Her presence did not demand space. It claimed it gently and without apology. A group of boys loitering near the sugarcane press shifted as she passed. An old woman counting coins at her sticky rice stall looked up and offered a faint nod, her lips curled into a knowing smile. It was like most days. People noticed her, often before they realized they had. These small gestures followed Pa Ying whenever she went, not because she sought attention, but because she carried herself like someone who had never questioned whether she was allowed to exist fully. "Someone was staring," one of her friends murmured, voice lilting with amusement as they passed the noodle stall. "By the clinic. He looked like he'd never seen a girl before. I thought his eyes might tumble out of his head." Pa Ying arched an eyebrow, but said nothing, her gaze already drifting elsewhere. A few steps later, she paused at a vendor's cart where slices of pickled mango glistened under a dusting of chili salt. They were arranged in small banana leaf bowls on an enamel tray. She reached into her small woven bag and withdrew her coin purse, placing a small silver coin into the weathered hand of the vendor. The woman grinned, her face map of laugh lines and sun. "For a pretty girl like you," she said, teasing warmly. "Sweet and sour suits you best. May your days be just as full of flavor." Pa Ying smiled, dipped her head politely, and selected a bowl. She walked on as she delicately dipped a mango slice into the salt and raised it to her lips. She tasted it slowly, thoughtfully, as though deciphering the flavor would unlock something greater, perhaps an answer to a question not yet asked. "Was he handsome?" she asked at last. Her friend gave a small shrug, amused. "He was. Rough. A little sunburned. Earthy. Like someone who belongs to a rice field. Your parents would never approve." Their other friend had already drifted toward a fabric stall, trailing her hand along a brocade of Lao silk. "Then let him stare," Pa Ying replied. "The market charges no fees for looking." Her voice was not sharp nor smug. It was not arrogance. It was not dismissal. It was simply the truth. She had learned to absorb the world's gaze without letting it touch her. She had grown used to eyes that lingered too long, to whispers that trailed behind her like loose threads on a well-worn skirt. Attention was a garment she wore with grace, never letting it weigh more than it should. She knew what people said about her father's business, about her family's standing, about her unmarried status, and her quiet ambition. But she moved through it all untouched, as though the world had no claim on her unless she chose to grant it. "Anyway," her friend continued, looping their arms together again, "what are you doing tomorrow? Come with me to the tailor. I need a new sing before New Year. Something with red. Or plum. Something bold." Pa Ying smiled faintly, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. "I'll be at the clinic. I'm volunteering again." Her friend groaned dramatically. "Again? Pa Ying? They're going to think you want to marry the doctor?" "They already think I want to marry someone," Pa Ying replied dryly. The friend snorted, and they walked a few more steps before Pa Ying spoke again, quieter this time. "I'm not going to the clinic for a husband. I want to be a nurse." The words slipped out like something fragile she had cradled inside for a long time, a confession hidden behind mango slices and careful silences. Her friend turned toward her with a look that was no longer teasing. "There's a nursing program," Pa Ying continued. "They're finally accepting Hmong girls, just a few, to work alongside the doctors. I'll be done with school next year. I want to apply the year after." "Really?" Her friend blinked in surprise. "I thought you were going to help at your father's shop." "I still might, if I don't get in. But I want more than ledgers and goods. The shop was never meant for me. I have 5 brothers. One of them will inherit it, or all of them. I want something I can hold on to with my own hands. Something that's mine. Something that no one can take away or inherit simply by birth." She paused, watching a soldier lift a sick child into a cart just beyond the clinic doors. "I want to help people. I want to walk into a room and be needed. To ease pain. To be the reason someone recovers. I want something I can be proud of. Not because I'm someone's daughter. Not because of my family name, but because I have earned it." Her friend was quiet. Pa Ying's gaze drifted toward the line of people outside the clinic. She had seen the faces in the line too many times. Bent-backed grandmothers wrapped in threadbare scarves. Mothers with feverish babies. Men who insisted their wounds were nothing. Soldiers who looked like boys, still learning how to be men. She had watched the nurses move among them with calm and steady hands, measuring heartbeats, lifting arms, and whispering small comforts. She remembered the moment the head nurse handed her a tray and said, "You're good at this." She had felt proud, not because she came from an influential family, not because she was admired or well-spoken, but because she had done something real. The sight of blood did not frighten her, nor did the cries of pain. "I want to be more than a daughter," she added. "I want to be someone who is respected for who she is, not for who she belongs to." Her friend looked at her for a long moment, then smiled, this time without teasing. "Well then, You'll have to get a very fine sing when you graduate. Something bold to go with your white uniform." Pa Ying laughed, soft and fleeting, and for a moment they were only girls again, meandering through the golden heat and scent of fermented fish and cane sugar. But even as they turned toward the fabric stall and the noise of the market enveloped them once more, Pa Ying's thoughts remained with the clinic, with the scent of antiseptic and weight of gauze bandages, with the women who reached for a hand when she brought them water, with the ache in her feet at the end of the day, a small and steady proof that she had done something worthwhile. She did not know if the program would accept her. She did not know if girls like her were ever truly allowed to dream beyond the borders of family and marriage. But still, she would try. She was determined, and that, she had decided, would be enough for now. The idea that a young man had watched her from across the street did not stir in her thoughts. Not even the longing stare of a boy with calloused hands and a farmer's son could distract her from the future she was learning how to imagine. The hills welcomed the young man back with their usual silence. Morning fog curled like breath along the slopes, and the distant cooing of chickens echoed through the trees. The wind threaded through the tall grasses, carrying the scent of earth and ash and wild lemongrass. Familiar as the folds of his own palm, he returned to the work that waited for him, checking the traps, mending the fences, tending to the fields where the soil remembered his hands. He rose before the sun most days, shaking the morning cold from his joints as he strapped on the woven basket. The soil was harder now, the rains reluctant. He worked in silence, hands buried deep in the earth, coaxing life from roots and stalks, pulling weeds that returned no matter how often he bent to them. No one asked where he had been. No one noticed he had been gone. The days unspooled in their quiet order. Each evening, he scrubbed the dirt from his arms at the spout by the banana grove, the water cold against skin, browned and toughened by Sunday. He ate alone, slept alone. This was the life he knew, predictable, practical, a string of solitary tasks stitched together by the need to endure. He had never minded this before. Morning mist, midday Sunday, evening firelight. Nothing had changed, and yet something inside him had softened. A thread had loosened. He had only seen her once, just once, yet her image lingered the way rain pools in the ridges of a leaf, the way light lingers behind closed eyes. He remembered her not as whole, but in pieces, the shimmer of her rose-colored sing, silver threads catching the afternoon Sunday, the tilt of her head as she listened, the grace in her posture that showed her quiet confidence, the unbothered way she moved through the world as if no one had ever taught her to be small, and her laughter, a melody that belonged to some season warmer than his own. It was not simply her beauty that unsettled him. He had seen pretty girls before. It was the life she carried, one that had never brushed up against his own, a life untouched by the harshness of soil or scarcity, a world apart from his. He had watched her from a distance, and only knew her name. She knew nothing of him, yet something about her had taken root in him, a presence that left a quiet ache, something he could not name without fear of being foolish. The firewood still needed splitting, the roof leaked when the rain came too heavy, the stone mill sat idle, waiting for repairs. These were the things he understood. But even as he moved through his daily rhythm of feeding the hens, carrying sacks of grain, cooking rice over the wood stove, he found his mind straying. He imagined the sound of her voice when she spoke with purpose. He wondered what it would feel like to be seen by someone like her, not glanced at, not dismissed, but truly seen, to have his name known by her, to matter in a world not carved from the same clay as his own. What would she think of a boy like him? A boy with no title to offer, no inheritance but soil? Would she look at him in the eye, or through him like others had? Would her voice soften if she ever spoke his name? But that thought was too delicate to keep. Girls like her were born into rooms with windows, into families with names people remembered, into lives that never bend their backs in the field or walk miles for medicine. His world was of dirt, sweat, and cracked soles, of bathing at the edge of a stream and counting eggs by the week. His palms were too calloused to hold something as soft as her. He had not spoken to her, had not dared to, but he had seen enough to know that the memory would follow him. It found him in the stillness of the night, in the ache behind his knees after a long day, in the breath he held before sleep. It filled the empty corners of his room, pressed against the space between his ribs. And even long after he returned to his home tucked in the hills, as the seasons turned and the harvest came and went, and life settled back into its old rhythm, he remembered the sound of her laughter. He remembered the moment when the world seemed to hush around her, as if nothing else beneath the sky had dared to exist, as if it had only ever been him and the girl. Each night, when he laid his head to rest, before weariness claimed his tired body, one question dwelled in his mind. Will there ever be a day for love? A love that asked for no wealth, no title, no certainty, only a heart willing to hope. He did not speak the question aloud. He carried it like a whisper in the hollow of his chest. He held it, like one might hold water in cupped hands, carefully to not spill a single drop, a secret stitched between the furrows of the field and the silence of the mountains. For now, he held her name like a blessing, one not yet spoken into the hills, one not yet dared in prayer. But, still, he thought of her, and the thought of her was enough to bring him comfort. Chapter 2. Laos, 1968. The rains had come early that year. In the northern mountains of Laos, the season was meant to be hot and dry, yet the sky had begun to soften into a haze of gray. The air smelled faintly of ash and soil, of fields burned, and newly plowed in anticipation of the rains. Smoke curled from the hillsides where farmers cleared their land, and a restless wind carried the scent of char and beginnings. That day, the rain fell with quiet insistence, soft and relentless, a curtain between the world and the things that could not be undone. It was not a season for rain, and yet it came, as if summoned by consequence. That morning it felt like judgment. The rain gathered along the eaves of their home, dripping in slow silver threads into the courtyard below. Their house stood on a rise overlooking the valley, a 2-story structure of teak and plaster with louvered shutters painted the color of old jade. Its tiled roof caught the dim light like memory of the sun, and the whitewashed walls, rinsed clean by rain, gleamed softly against the darkening hills. From the veranda, one could see the faint smoke of field burnings curling above the slopes, and farther still, the corrugated roofs of the market where her father's shop stood among rows of stalls and wooden carts. The house itself was a reflection of the family who lived within it, neither ostentatious nor humble, but built with quiet pride and an attention to grace. A low wall circled the courtyard, its gate opening onto a dirt road that curved like a question through the city. Potted ferns lined the steps, and a stone bench sat by the entrance, damp now with rain. In the fading light, the shutters glowed faintly green against the cream walls, and the hum of distant voices carried from beyond the gates, where neighbors paused to greet one another before retreating home. Inside, the house was kept with care. The broad wooden stairs were swept clean, the floors polished until they caught the light, and the windows framed with lace curtains acquired in Luang Prabang. The air was still, and perfumed faintly with camphor, roasted coffee, and the fragrance of steaming rice. Upstairs, the rooms were arranged with quiet symmetry. A small transistor radio rested near the window, its static hum occasionally breaking into foreign voices from the airstrip below. Outside, a rooster crowed against the rain, and somewhere the low drone of an engine rose and disappeared into the mist. Sometimes, when the wind shifted, the scent of the market reached their home. Dust and spice and faint smoke carried up the slope, reminding Pa Ying of the world that was unfolding around her, a world shaped by war and survival. Beyond the window, the world was blurred into grays, but within those walls, everything remained in careful order. The furniture polished, the curtains drawn, The silence measured. Even the rain, it seemed, respected the threshold. Yet beneath that silence, something unspoken had begun to stir. The air felt heavier than the rain outside, as though the house itself held its breath. From somewhere down the hall came the faint click of an enamel cup and the muted scrape of a chair being drawn from the table. Pa Ying knew the rhythm of her mother's movements, the deliberate way she tidied when her thoughts were troubled, the stillness that followed before she spoke. The scent of camphor deepened in the air, sharp and clean, mingling with the low hum of rain. A single call from her mother broke the silence, soft, yet unyielding, carrying through the house like the toll of something inevitable. Pa Ying entered the room quietly. The light was dim, filtering through shutters still damp from the downpour. Her mother sat near the window, her figure framed by the dull shimmer of light slipping between carved panels. An enamel cup sat untouched beside her, the tea long gone cold. She did not look up when Pa Ying entered. Her hands were folded neatly in her lap, the way women hold grief before it is named. For a long while, she said nothing. Only the steady percussion of rain filled the silence between them. "Sit," her mother said at last. Her voice was neither gentle nor harsh, only tired, the kind of tired that comes when there is no mercy left in the choices one must make. Pa Ying obeyed, lowering herself into the chair beside her. The floor creaked softly beneath her, a sound too small to disturb the weight of the silence between them. For a moment, neither spoke. Only the rain kept its rhythm, steady as a pulse, marking the passing of what the rain itself could not wash away. Outside, the wind shifted, and the rain against the shutters softened into a slow, uncertain drizzle. "You have shamed me," her mother said, her words steady as a blade drawn across silk. "And yet, I cannot bring myself to be angry. What good would anger do when the world already judges you by what it chooses to believe? Anger will not feed us, nor change what has been decided." Pa Ying's breath caught, though she had long prepared herself for this moment. Shame rose like heat in her cheeks and along her throat, but she did not weep. Her tears had dried in the hollow hours, after everything had already happened. Her mother's gaze, calm but searching, moved over Pa Ying's face, as though studying the pattern of an embroidery for flaws. "You have always been a good daughter," she said quietly. "But the world does not forgive girls easily. A whisper is enough to turn a name into something worse than dirt." The words, though softly spoken, fell like stones into water, each one sinking deeper than the last. Her mother's tone was calm, yet beneath it ran something sharp and trembling. It was fear, disappointment, and the quiet desperation of a woman trying to save what could still be saved. Pa Ying's hands tightened in her lap. Her mother's gaze lowered to Pa Ying's fingers, white and still. For an instant, compassion trembled at the edge of her resolve. She sighed, her breath clouding the space between them. "You understand that what has happened cannot be hidden forever. You even refused the herbal medicine I offered." She straightened, her voice gaining steadiness again. "Our family has worked too hard to build this life. Your father's shop stands because our name is trusted. It is not the goods we sell that make us respected, but our reputation, your father's business acumen, your uncle's service as lieutenant, your other uncle's post overseeing this district. These are the pillars that hold our name upright. Our family stands apart from those who come and go with the seasons. All of it, everything we are, rests upon the faith others place in our name. Lose that, and we are nothing." Pa Ying lowered her eyes, her lashes glistening faintly in the rainlight. Her mother's tone carried no cruelty, only the resignation of a woman who had lived long enough to know that every choice must bend beneath the weight of reputation. For a fleeting moment, her mother's expression softened, but discipline reclaimed her. Her gaze drifted toward the window, where the light had thinned into a dull shimmer. "Your father does not yet know. I have carried this in my chest as if it were coal, too hot to keep, too dangerous to drop. Sleep has not visited me. I have kept this alone, hoping for a way to make it right before he learns it from another mouth." She exhaled slowly, her breath thin and trembling. But I will tell him soon, and when I do, I must keep him from breaking. You know how pride binds a man. To be made a fool before the town would destroy him. The thought of her father, stern and measured, his voice commanding in every market stall and shop, filled Pa Ying with dread. He had raised her with tenderness, disguised as structure, affection cloaked in expectation. She could not imagine his face when he learned of her misjudgment. I must bring him a solution that does not shame him or you. Pa Ying lifted her head slightly. What solution? Outside, the rain deepened, heavy and unending, as though the sky itself bore witness. My cousin in Sathon has sent word, her mother continued, her tone quieter now, as if each word required care. Her husband's kin have a young man, a farmer still unmarried, quiet, honest, hard-working, no vice to his name. His family owns fields in the highlands, where life is simple and gossip travels slowly. She hesitated, as if listening to the rain for permission to go on. If you agree, we will arrange the union at once. Pa Ying looked at her mother, almost in disbelief that this was the solution. His name is Tai. Her mother spoke the name as if it were a prayer, or perhaps a sentence. He will take a wife if it is arranged through kin. It will protect your name, and when your father is told, he will see that the solution has already been secured. Pa Ying could hear the beating of her heart. It will save your name, Pa Ying. It will save us all. The desperation in her mother's voice trembled through the air like an unspoken plea. Pa Ying said nothing for a long while. The sound of rain had gentled to a hush, no longer scolding but sorrowful, as if the sky itself had grown weary of judgment. Her hands lay motionless in her lap, her fingers pale against the dark weave of her skirt. Her eyes followed the slow beads of rain at the eaves, each drop a moment, slipping out of reach. Marriage did not frighten her, not truly. Since childhood, she had been raised expecting marriage, yet she had never imagined it would arrive like this, heavy with consequence. The shape of it felt foreign, a gate closing rather than a door opening. What frightened her was how easily her life could be rewritten by another's decision, as if she were a thread tied neatly to someone else's life. She pressed her fingers to her knees to still their trembling. And if I do not agree? Her mother looked at her with a weary mercy. Then you condemn us all to shame. Your father will hear of it from another mouth, and there will be no gentleness left in what is said of you. Every girl born after you will bear your name as a stain. People will whisper that the merchant's daughter dragged her house down with her. The world does not need truth to destroy a woman. Rumor is enough. A tremor passed through Pa Ying's body. So much gathered at the edge of her tongue, yet none of it could be spoken. Outside, a motorbike rattled along the wet street, and somewhere a child laughed, life continuing, indifferent to ruin. Her mother reached for her hand, her fingers cold and dry. There is no winning for women like us, she said softly. Only survival, and the hope that our daughters will not have to make the same choices we did. I will tell your father before the moon changes. When I do, he must hear not your mistake but your redemption. Pa Ying looked down at their joined hands, one soft, the other worn by years of labor and devotion, and she understood what her mother had sacrificed for years. Not wealth, not comfort, but dignity in a world that took it from women piece by piece. Her mother withdrew and turned back to the window. The rain softened now, silver threads unspooling across the clearing fields. Smoke still rose faintly from the hillsides, where men burned stubble and women were planting the first rice nurseries, praying the rains would come steady this year. Her mother's voice, when it came again, carried both memory and fatigue. I did not marry your father because I loved him. I did not even know him. The rain beat softly against the roof, steady and unbroken. When your father first saw me, she continued, I was washing clothes by the river in my village. He was passing through with a caravan of goods. He asked my uncle about me. I thought little of it. Men often asked, but your father returned a fortnight later to ask for my hand. Pa Ying watched the rainlight move across her mother's face, softening the lines that life had drawn there. You agreed? Her mother smiled faintly, though not with fondness. No, I refused. My little brother was still young, barely 10. Our mother had died when he was 5. On her deathbed, she made me promise to raise him, to see him properly wedded. I kept that promise close to my heart. The room was still except for the whisper of rain on the roof. After my mother died, my father remarried, she said. My stepmother did not love us. She treated my brother as if he were the filth of another life, something she could never wash away. We were forbidden to eat at the same table. I wanted to stay and care for him, but my grandmother said, "You are a girl. Sooner or later, you must live your own life. Life does not wait for those who linger. Go with this man who has come here seeking you." Her hands remained folded neatly in her lap, but her voice trembled with something long buried. "Your father told me that if I married him, I could still care for my brother. He promised to send my brother to school." It sounded like kindness, and perhaps it was. She paused. So I went with him. I cried the entire way to his home. She exhaled slowly, her tone finding calm again. "We were never lovers, your father and I. We became partners in respectability. And in time, parents, love came later, the quiet, dutiful kind that survives what passion cannot." Pa Ying listened in silence. Her mother's words, spoken without bitterness, revealed a lifetime of choices made for others, never for herself. For the first time, she understood her mother's strength was not in her composure, but in endurance, in carrying sorrow without letting it spill. "Do you regret it?" Pa Ying asked softly, her voice almost swallowed by the hum of the rain. Her mother's gaze softened. "Regret is a heavy word. Some days, I wonder what would have become of me had I not washed clothes by the river that morning. Other days, I think of the promise your father kept, the one that gave me shelter, that sent my brother to school, that allowed me to keep the vow I made to my dying mother." The air thickened with memory. The faint smell of wet earth drifted through the shutters. "After I married your father, I tasted for the first time the tender meat of a chicken thigh. I owned a new tailored sing. I was no longer mending rags or eating scraps. Marrying your father seemed the only choice I had then, and now I know it was the right one. He kept his word. I was able to send my brother to school and see him wedded. I kept the promise I made to my dying mother. What good does wondering do? The river flows, and so must we. This is fate." Pa Ying's throat tightened. "Mother, were you afraid?" "I was terrified," her mother said. "I did not know your father. We never had a proper courtship." But I smiled. That is what women learn, to hide fear until it becomes indistinguishable from grace. Her mother reached forward, her hands steady on her daughter's shoulders. "Remember this. Love may not come at once, but respect can grow where kindness is sown. And that, my daughter, will be enough." The rain began to thin, leaving behind the scent of damp soil and smoke. The fields would soon green again. Inside, a daughter's world narrowed to the fragile space between her mother's eyes and her own reflection in them, one filled with fear, the other with resignation. Her mother took her hand once more. "Sometimes," she said at last, almost reverent, "the only way to protect what we love is to surrender it. This is the way of women." Pa Ying nodded faintly. A single tear slid down her cheek, though she did not brush it away. She understood now that love, in her mother's tongue, had always meant sacrifice. Her mother's voice softened into a whisper. "We do not always marry for love. Sometimes we marry for the glint of a new beginning." She drew in a long breath, her tone firm again. "You will meet Tai tomorrow evening. He is not a man of wealth or prestige, but he is steady. I believe he will treat you gently." Pa Ying watched her mother sitting perfectly straight, her posture graceful yet taut, the way one sits when carrying something fragile that must not break. She looked at her then, not as the voice of discipline she had always known, but as a woman who bore her own hidden wars. The faint lines around her eyes, the careful way she spoke, the composure she wore like silk armor, each revealed a love too proud to beg and too weary to weep. In that quiet, Pa Ying understood that her mother's coldness was not heartless, but sorrow, an inheritance passed from one woman to the next, bound by the same ropes that circled their necks. I understand, Pa Ying said. I will meet him tomorrow. She rose, her breath shallow, her body moving as though caught between two worlds, the one that had raised her and the one she was being given to. When she reached the threshold, she paused and looked back. Her mother stood in the faint light, her expression unreadable, a blend of pride, fear, and quiet resignation. The scent of jasmine lingered in the room, mingling with the memory of the river her mother once stood beside. The same river, perhaps, that now carried Pa Ying toward her fate. The sun sagged low along the hem of the horizon, casting long amber shadows across the corrugated tin rooftops and evergreen ridges. A hush settled over Longtiang, as though even the wind was holding its breath. The last shimmer of light clung to the sky like embers after a great fire. Shadows stretched long and uncertain, cloaking the narrow footpath between her home and the grove of bamboo oaks in solemn reverence. Pa Ying walked slowly, as if each step required the permission of her spirit. The distance was short, familiar even, yet each step felt like an invisible sorrow, a slow descent into something inevitable. The path to the end of the airstrip, where a tamarind tree stood like a devoted witness, was scarcely more than a child's run, yet to her it stretched like a sentence, each stride pressing her further into a future she had not chosen. She paused beneath a swaying fig tree, her breath shallow. The scent of earth after sun lingered in the air, heavy and alive. It was not too late to turn back, she thought to herself, to vanish into the safety of her mother's shadowed doorway and pretend the night had never beckoned her. Yet, she knew better. There are moments in life when turning back is not cowardice, merely a delay. She had delayed long enough. She reminded herself that she was not being marched toward her end, but toward something unknown, possibly redemptive, perhaps another form of ruin in gentler clothing. Either way, she was no longer free to turn back. Her body had already committed her heart to a decision it still could not make. She had disgraced her family, not by intention but by consequence. And often the two were indistinguishable in the eyes of society. Now she had been offered a path toward her own redemption. Though it came wrapped in grief, she would accept it, knowing it held no promise of happiness, only the chance to shield those she could not bear to see suffer further. Her feet carried her onward of their own accord, until at last 2 figures emerged ahead, standing underneath the tamarind tree bathing in the pale hush of dusk. The elder man was first to step forward, arms open in a gesture of warmth that felt oddly theatrical. "Ah, Pa Ying," he said, voice too cheerful for the hour. "I was worried you might not come." He took her hands in both of his, the skin worn like old paper, and peered kindly into her wary face. "I'm glad you didn't have a change of heart," he said gently. "You are well?" She nodded with a decorum she had long practiced. "Uncle, I am fine," she said, though her voice faltered at the edge. Her eyes, however, drifted past him to the younger man who stood several paces behind in the half-light. He was not what she expected. He did not smile, nor did he speak. His eyes, steady and dark, held neither pity nor judgment, only calm. He wore no city polish, only a modest white-collared shirt and a meekness that lay over him like evening mist. He stood as if he were sculpted from the earth itself, broad-shouldered and quiet, with sun-browned skin, and the look of a man who labored without complaint. His features were neither forgettable nor striking, but composed in such a way that made one believe he might grow handsome over time, once familiarity had softened the initial plainness. The elder followed her gaze and beamed. "Ah, yes, my nephew Tai. His father was kin to my grandfather's first cousin or some such. Too tangled to explain tonight. Another time." He chuckled and nudged her gently forward. "Come, meet him." They stopped, just short of arm's length. "This is Pa Ying," he announced with pride, as though presenting an offering to fate. "I've told you about her." The young man inclined his head, his voice low and even. "Yes, uncle. I remember." The elder gave them both a nod, a twinkle of satisfaction lighting in his eyes. "I'll leave you both now. Get to know one another. I'll wait back at the house." With that, the elder took his leave, murmuring pleasantries and assurances as he retreated into the distance, leaving the two of them in the hush of half-light. For a long moment, neither spoke. The silence stretched, taut and uncertain, until at last the young man exhaled, so quietly it might have gone unnoticed if Pa Ying had not been listening so closely. And then, under the silver sliver of moonlight that brushed the edge of his face, she thought she glimpsed the softest lift at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile, more like the ghost of one, faint, uncertain, gone before she could be sure. She hesitated, then exhaled softly. "I was wondering." Her voice was thin, almost lost in the night. "Why you agreed to this arrangement?" The question hung between them like a veil. He did not flinch. Instead, he met her gaze, unwavering. "When my uncle came to me," he began, faltering just long enough to swallow something unsaid, "and told me of your circumstance, I thought perhaps it was fate." Fate, the word stung like a spark on tinder. It was a cruel and indifferent word, invoked too often by those who benefited from its whims. She had seen it wielded as a tool of cruelty too many times. It was used as the explanation for every injustice women like her were forced to endure. Fate had stolen her love, her dignity, and now her freedom. He continued, quiet, but certain. "My parents died many years ago. My sister had just begun to walk when our mother passed. She's nearly grown now, and I've done what I can, but a girl needs a woman's guidance. And," he paused, as if embarrassed to admit something so plain, "it gets lonely. When I heard of you, of your story, I thought the time was right. Loneliness." That admission felt honest, perhaps the most honest thing either of them had admitted so far. She swallowed a bitter chuckle at the irony of his words. The right time, as if time had not already betrayed her. And yet something in his voice steadied her, the gentle conviction of a man who asked for no more than he offered. Still, none of his reasons mattered until she asked the question that had been pressing against her chest since she agreed to come. It was the question that had lodged in her throat, the only question that mattered most. One she could not let go, unspoken. One that would determine everything. Her gaze sharpened on his face. "The baby," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He's not yours. Does that not trouble you?" He was silent, absorbing her words. When he finally spoke, his voice was gentle and deliberate, each syllable measured as though weighed before being released. "He is the reason I have you." His confession formed a fragile bridge over the vast uncertainty between them, delicate as a dewdrop. The crickets chirped in the darkness, filling the space between their breaths. "If it weren't for him, I would never have met you. I believe things happen as they're meant to. I may not have much, but what I have, I want to share. Everything that's mine, I hope can become ours." Her throat tightened. Tears shimmered, but she blinked them back. There was no room for sentiment now. "Do you think you can love him? The child?" His answer was immediate and unwavering. "Yes, absolutely. I will love our child." His promise lingered in the air, fragile and sacred. She swallowed the sob that threatened to rise. It was the answer her heart had quietly prayed for. He was a stranger, yet she recognized kindness in him. And kindness had always been elusive in her world. This was not the life she had envisioned, but it might be, she thought, the life that could save her. "Thank you," she murmured, though the words felt too small for the weight of the moment. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, and shattered the spell. "It's getting late," she said. "I should go." He nodded, though he did not move. She took a step back. "Tomorrow night," she said. "You'll have my answer." She turned, the hem of her skirt brushing the dust behind her, and then, just before she slipped into the dark, she heard him call after her, soft and certain. "I don't pray to be the man of all your dreams, only the one you'll come to need." This excerpt is an original work in progress from the upcoming book Beneath Tomorrow's Sky by Moua. All rights reserved. This material is the intellectual property of the author and may not be reproduced, distributed, or used without permission. The excerpt shared is for preview and promotional purposes only, and may be subject to edits or revisions prior to publication.